welcome to Reformed Thinking.
It is great to be here for this.
So imagine you are sitting at a desk, right? And you have this fragile, ancient manuscript right in front of you.
Oh, setting the scene. I like it.
You're translating a text that literally shapes the worldview of billions of people across the globe. And as you're scanning the faded ink, you come across a single, highly unusual word.
Which happens a lot more often than people realize, you know.
It really does. So you pull out your heavy academic dictionaries, and the definitions present you with two starkly different choices.
Two very distinct paths to go down.
Choice A tells you this word means a person who harbors a vicious, active hatred toward God.
Right.
But choice B tells you this word means a person whom God actively hates and finds totally abhorrent. You have to pick one.
And whichever one you pick, I mean, you alter the theological reality of the entire passage.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
You know, you read a sentence in English, and you probably assume there's a clean one-to-one equivalent in the original ancient language.
Like a math equation or something.
Yeah. Yeah, like you assume the translator took a Greek word, found the English word that means that specific thing, and just, slotted it in.
It feels safe to assume that. We like our reading experience to be straightforward, especially when dealing with texts that carry massive spiritual and historical weight.
Right.
We want the dictionary to give us one solid, objective answer. We do not want to think about the translator sweating over an impossible choice.
But then you step into the world of ancient Greek linguistics, specifically the language of the New Testament and classical literature.
And suddenly that pristine dictionary looks a lot more like a battlefield.
It really does. Today, our mission is a comprehensive analysis of a single, highly debated ancient Greek word. It is theostyges.
Yeah, theostigēs.
We have a massive stack of sources on the table today for this deep dive. We are looking at theological lexicons, grammatical commentaries from scholars like David Abernathy and C.E.D. Cranfield.
We also have the Lunita lexicon in the stack.
We do. And we have classical Greek citations that range all the way from Homer's ancient epic poetry to the Apostle Paul's letter to the Romans.
What makes the stack of sources so fascinating is the central mystery they present to us.
Oh, for sure.
We were looking at one specific adjective that somehow possesses two completely opposite directional meanings, depending on which translator you ask.
Or which century you happen to be reading it in.
Yes. Does theostigēs mean someone who actively hates God, or does it mean someone who is abhorrent to God?
Right. Does the hatred flow from the human upward or from the divine downward?
That is the million-dollar question.
You might think every word in your translated texts has a simple, static meaning. But this discussion is going to show you how a single adjective carries a massive theological debate on its shoulders.
To understand how a word can point in two completely different directions, we have to start by taking the word apart.
Yeah, let's look at the anatomy and assembly of theostyges.
Taking a scalpel to the word is the best place to start. In linguistics, we call this looking at the morphology of the word.
Morphology is just a technical term for dissecting a word into its individual anatomical parts, right? Just to see how it was built.
Spot on. Theostygēs is a compound word. It is formed by joining two distinct Greek elements. The first half is theos, which is the standard Greek word for God or a deity.
Okay, pretty straightforward so far.
And the second half comes from the base of the verb stygio, or the adjective stygetos.
And that root word does not mean a mild dislike, does it?
Not at all. It denotes intense hatred, severe antipathy, a visceral loathing.
Okay, let's visualize this. Think of ancient Greek compound words like distinct Lego bricks.
I like that analogy.
You have your God brick and you have your intense hatred brick. You snap them together to build a new concept.
Right.
But here's the tricky part about Greek grammar. Simply snapping those two bricks together does not automatically tell you who is holding the bricks and who is getting hit by them.
That is a great way to put it. The morphology alone leaves the direction ambiguous.
It is like the English word fearful. If I say to you, we are in for a fearful storm, you understand that the storm is causing the fear.
Yeah, the energy is moving from the storm to the people.
But if I say, look at that fearful child, the child is not causing the fear. The child is experiencing it.
The building blocks of the word are the same, but the direction of the energy completely changes based on context.
Right. So is theostyges the storm, or is it the child?
Well, to figure out the direction of the energy, we have to look at what linguists call cognates.
Okay, break that down for us. What is a cognate?
A cognate is simply a word that shares a common origin or a similar structural pattern with the word you are studying. They belong to the same linguistic family.
So he checks the family tree.
Yes. And our sources give us a helpful list of related compound words. For example, we have atheos, which means without God.
And we have philotheos, which means a lover of God.
We also have theomachos, which translates to fighting God.
So we look at the family tree to see how the relatives behave.
Correct. When you look at how these specific compounds function, especially the ones describing a human disposition toward the divine, the human is usually the subject performing the action.
Okay, that makes sense.
A philotheos is someone who actively loves God, not someone God loves. A theomachos is a person actively fighting against God, not someone God is fighting against.
The energy flows from the human upward.
Yes, it does.
Following that pattern, if philotheos is someone who actively loves God, it makes logical sense that theostyges would be someone who actively hates God.
It follows the pattern perfectly.
And the root stygio implies a severe active antipathy. It is an aggressive posture. It is not a passive disregard.
No, it's not.
It is not just sleeping in on a Sunday morning and ignoring religion. It is a burning animosity.
That active aggressive posture is a critical detail in the sources. The root stygio carries a heavy emotional and volitional weight.
Meaning it involves the human will.
Yes. It requires a conscious rejection and loathing. Knowing the raw materials of the word, knowing these two heavy concepts that are snapped together, we have to look at how ancient people actually used the word.
Right, in everyday language and literature.
We need to look at the historical timeline long before the New Testament was even written.
Wait, if the word family suggests the human is the one doing the hating, the historical usage should back that up, right?
You would assume so.
But here is where the plot thickens considerably. Our sources note that in earlier times, going back centuries before the 1st century, the word was exclusively used in a passive sense.
Yeah, it is a huge twist.
It did not mean hating God. It meant god-detested, hated of the gods, or god-forsaken.
And the historical consensus on this early usage is overwhelming. The passive meaning was the undisputed standard in classical Greek literature.
Oh, wow. So it was everywhere.
It was. When you look at the citations provided in the lexicons, you see a consistent pattern of authors applying this word to individuals who are cursed by the heavens.
The hatred is moving from the divine realm downward onto the subject.
Always.
We are not talking about obscure, forgotten writers here either. The sources list the absolute heavy hitters of ancient Greek literature.
Homer, for instance.
Yeah, we have Homer using it in the Iliad. We have Euripides using it in his plays like the Trojan Women and the Cyclops. We have Aeschylus, Sophocles, Pindar, and Plato.
All of these core authors of Western literature use theostyges with this passive meaning.
Let's look at Euripides for a second. When he writes about the Cyclops, Polyphemus, he is describing a monstrous, brutal, man-eating creature who lives in a cave and slaughters sailors.
Not exactly a great guy.
Right. And Euripides describes this monster as theostyges, hated by the gods.
To understand why this passive meaning dominated classical thought, we have to look closely at the Greco-Roman worldview.
How did they see the world?
Well, in that culture, human tragedy, monstrous figures, or catastrophic misfortunes were viewed as a direct result of divine cursing.
So it wasn't just bad luck.
No, if someone suffered a horrific fate, or if a creature like the Cyclops existed outside the bounds of natural order and morality, the immediate cultural assumption was that the gods loathed them.
The gods of Olympus were capricious.
Very capricious. If they decided they hated you, your life was ruined. You were assigned a status from heaven downward. You were literally god-detested.
Hold on, though. This creates a massive point of friction.
It really does.
If centuries of famous authors, from Homer all the way down to Plato, agreed this word meant cursed by the gods, Paul could not just invent a new definition out of thin air in a letter to Rome.
His readers would have been incredibly confused.
Right. If you are a translator today and you see a word that Homer and Sophocles used to mean god-forsaken, what justifies changing the definition later on?
It is a massive leap.
What gave a first-century writer the linguistic right to flip this word on its head and suddenly say it means hating God?
That is the core tension of our whole analysis. To answer it, we have to examine the specific mechanism of linguistic drift.
And how a specific religious subculture can adopt and shift the meaning of a word.
Yes. We have to look at a textual moment that pushes the discussion directly into the 1st century, where a writer uses the word in a way that forces the classical definition to break.
And this shift occurs in Paul's letter to the Romans.
It does.
Let's set the scene for Romans chapter 1, verse 30. Paul's writing to a Christian community living in the capital of the Roman Empire.
The culture around them is saturated with the Greco-Roman worldview we just talked about.
Right. And Paul writes this dense, relentless catalog of human vices. He is listing out the characteristics of a humanity that has completely rejected its creator.
It's a very intense passage.
It is. The list includes whisperers, slanderers, the insolent, the arrogant, and boasters. And right there, wedged between slanderers and the insolent, is our word, theostyges.
The linguistic pivot happens specifically because of this surrounding context. Scholars argue the meaning shifts to the active sense, hating God or one who hates God, because of the company the word keeps in this sentence.
Look at every other word in this immediate list. They all describe a wicked human behavior or a sinful human attitude.
Whisperers are people actively gossiping. Slanderers are people actively tearing down the reputations of others. The arrogant are people actively elevating themselves above their neighbors.
It is a continuous list of things people are actively doing to rebel. It describes human impiousness.
Yeah.
If you were reading this list and suddenly the author dropped in the word that meant people who are hated by God, it would completely break the rhythm and the logic of the sentence.
It would be like saying the suspect was a thief, a liar, a person who got struck by lightning, and a cheat.
Yes. The third item does not fit the category of personal vices.
Okay.
It makes no sense to put a cosmic curse in the middle of a list of daily human sins.
That is the precise grammatical argument made by the heavyweights in our sources. A. de Brunner, in his extensive work on Greek word formation, points this out.
What did he say about it?
He states that in the list of vices in Romans 1:30, the active meaning of hating God is highly preferable.
Because it fits the flow.
Yes. It aligns with the morphology of other similar compound adjectives that describe human attitudes, and it perfectly fits the flow of the argument Paul is making about human rebellion.
We also see this active sense maintained in writings that came shortly after the New Testament.
Yeah, that is a really good point.
The sources point out that Pseudo-Clement, which is a collection of early Christian writings from the centuries following Paul, uses the word in a clearly active way. It pairs it with the word for unjust.
And the letter of 1 Clement, written around the end of the 1st century, uses the noun form theostygia, which is also taken in the active sense.
Those later writings are crucial evidence. They show how a religious subculture, the early Christians, co-opted a cultural word and shifted its meaning within just a few generations.
They isolated themselves linguistically from the classical Greek world to create a vocabulary that accurately described their theological framework.
From their perspective of human depravity, the active translation makes total sense.
It really does. The list in Romans 1 is a chilling diagnosis of the unregenerate human heart.
It moves from subtle interpersonal sins like the quiet gossip of a whisperer to outright active hostility toward the Creator.
It defines the natural human state as one characterized by intense dislike toward God.
It paints a terrifying progression. You start by rejecting the knowledge of God, suppressing the truth, and eventually, the text argues, it devolves into a visceral hatred of the very concept of God.
It is a total rebellion.
But while the active meaning fits the surrounding list of sins so well, overturning centuries of classical Greek usage still bothers some people.
Oh, absolutely.
You do not just ignore the linguistic precedent of Homer and Plato without some serious pushback from other scholars.
You certainly do not. And this debate leads us directly into a major split among scholars on how to render Romans 1:30 into other languages.
The sources reveal a sharp dividing line, and both sides have highly prominent defenders.
It gives us a clear look at how translators weigh different types of evidence when making their final decisions.
Let's outline the two sides of this translation debate. On the active side, favoring hating God, we have the Luneta lexicon.
For context, the Luneta lexicon is unique because it categorizes Greek words not alphabetically, but by semantic domains.
Meaning it groups words based on related concepts, right?
Yes. In entry 88.205, they define our word as pertaining to hatred for God.
We also have the scholar David Abernathy, who provides an exegetical summary strongly supporting the active translation.
These sources prioritize the immediate biblical context and the grammatical alignment with the other vices in Paul's list.
Now, on the other side, holding on to the classical passive meaning, we have a formidable list of scholars and historical texts.
Edgar Goodspeed translates it as abhorrent to God.
James Moffatt translates it as loathed by God.
The New Revised Standard Version actually includes the passive meaning in its margin notes as an alternative.
Historically, the Latin Vulgate translated it with a passive sense, and the scholar C. Fritsch also argued for the passive interpretation.
These scholars are looking at the massive weight of classical Greek history and arguing that a word's established meaning over hundreds of years does not just vanish because of its neighbors in a sentence.
Let's talk about the Latin Vulgate for a second, because that is not just some obscure textbook.
No, it is incredibly significant.
The Vulgate was the late 4th century Latin translation of the Bible produced by Jerome. It became the definitive text for the Western Church for over 1,000 years.
It essentially locked in Western theological thought.
So if Jerome, sitting in his cave in Bethlehem, translating Greek into Latin, decided to use the passive meaning, essentially saying these people are loathed by God, why would he make that choice?
Did he just miss the context of the vice list?
Yeah, that's the question.
Well, Jerome was an incredibly brilliant linguist, so it is highly unlikely he just missed the context. To understand his reasoning, we have to consider how he might have viewed the theological implications of those extreme sins.
The list in Romans 1 describes behaviors that are intensely offensive to a holy creator.
A translator looking at that list might conclude that engaging in such severe wickedness, being a slanderer, being insolent, being a boaster, renders a person abhorrent to the divine.
In that view, theostyges functions as a summary judgment on the whole list of actions.
Yes. You commit these sins, and therefore, as a consequence, you become loathed by God.
It becomes a statement of divine reaction rather than human action. Think about the practical impact this has on how you read the text.
Changes everything.
You have to wonder, if you were sitting in Rome reading this letter for the first time, would you have caught that linguistic shift?
Probably not right away.
How does reading a list of gossips, slanderers, and people loathed by God hit your ear differently than reading gossips, slanderers, and people who hate God?
The act of translation makes it a human action. It is a diagnosis of the bitter rebellion in the human heart.
But the passive translation makes it a terrifying divine judgment. It is a statement about God's absolute revulsion towards sin.
The difference in perspective alters the entire tone of the passage, even though both concepts address the broken relationship between humanity and the Creator.
The act of reading highlights the extent of human corruption, showing that sin is an act of hatred of the lawgiver.
While the passive reading highlights the holiness of God and his necessary abhorrence of evil.
Lunita explicitly addresses this tension. Right?
They do. They state that interpreting theostyges in Romans 1:30 as those whom God hates is possible, though unlikely.
So they acknowledge the classical background, but ultimately decide the context of the vice list overrules the historical precedent.
Yes, they land on the active side based on context.
Which brings us to our final evaluation of what this word actually reveals about the relationship between humanity and the divine.
Let's focus on the primary definition of the active usage, which the majority of modern biblical scholars lean toward for Romans 1:30.
And that definition is characterized by intense dislike and antipathy toward God.
When we connect the dots between the theological implications and the linguistic roots, a very dark picture of human nature emerges.
This word signifies a conscious, active hostility. We mentioned the word atheos earlier, which means without God.
Atheos can sometimes imply a passive state, a lack of belief, or an ignorance of the divine, can be a state of emptiness.
But theostyges leaves absolutely no room for neutrality.
None. It is not agnostic. It is an active, aggressive rebellion.
It requires an incredible amount of cognitive effort to hate something. You have to acknowledge the authority of the thing in order to harbor animosity toward it.
You can't hate something you don't care about.
Right. The Greek language had specific categories for this kind of active spiritual warfare. They had the word theomachos, meaning fighting God.
They had vocabulary to describe a person who is not just ignoring heaven, but actively throwing stones at it.
To hate God is an exertion of energy. It requires a focused, deliberate animosity toward the authority and character of the Creator.
The human mind, when completely alienated from its source, does not just drift into a neutral, quiet void.
According to the progression described in the text, that alienation metastasizes into a fierce opposition.
The use of this specific compound word, drawing on the visceral hatred implied by the root stygio, tells us that the bitter end of human rebellion is not unbelief, but a deep-seated revulsion toward the divine nature itself.
You can see how looking at just one word in a lexicon opens up an entire theological worldview.
It's amazing.
We started with a linguistic puzzle, trying to figure out which way a word pointed, and we ended up staring at a staggering assessment of the severity of human sin.
It shows the precision of ancient languages and how translators have to wrestle with every single syllable to convey the correct theological weight.
The transition of this word from classical literature to the New Testament is a masterclass in how language adapts to describe new realities.
It took a word used by Homer to describe someone cursed by the gods from above and repurposed it to describe the internal curse of a heart that hates its maker from below.
The vocabulary remained the same, but the focus shifted from a passive tragedy to an active, culpable rebellion.
Let's recap the dual life of Theostygēs. We saw it start as a tragic classical label for those cursed by the gods, the monsters, the doomed figures of Greek plays like the Cyclops.
Then we saw it evolve in the New Testament, placed right in the middle of a list of vices, into a stark description of human hostility toward the Creator.
We looked at the intense debate among scholars, from Lunita to Jerome's Latin Vulgate, trying to decide if the hatred flows up or if it flows down.
That ongoing tension leaves us with a lingering question, one that is not directly answered by the lexicons or the grammatical commentaries.
If a single word holds the capacity for both hating God and hated by God, does that linguistic ambiguity suggest a terrifying reciprocal reality?
Reciprocal reality. What do you mean by that?
Think about the relationship between the active and passive meanings. If a person gives themselves over to the active meaning, if they cultivate an intense antipathy toward their creator, actively rebelling against him, do they inherently bring about the passive meaning upon themselves?
Oh, wow.
Does the act of being a hater of God inevitably result in becoming abhorrent to God?
The word itself blurs the line between the human crime and the divine consequence, suggesting that the two are inextricably linked.
Yes.
That is a weighty thought to walk away with. The word holds the crime and the consequence in the exact same breath.
It certainly does.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources today.
It was a fascinating discussion.
We hope this analysis of a single ancient word encourages you to keep questioning the text in front of you and to realize that beneath the surface of a simple translation, there is always a much larger conversation happening.